Good afternoon, everybody. Tess Crawley here, clinical and forensic psychologist and director of Dr. Tess Crawley and Associates. Now, I'm just with you live this afternoon and I'm sharing my post into the Stigma Rebellion, which, as you will all know by now, is our closed community, our closed Facebook community. Open to you to join. You're welcome to join. But it's a more private forum. So I'm sharing my videos these days on both the live streams are happening live both on my Tess Crawley and Associates Facebook page, but also in the Stigma Rebellion closed group. Now something's going on here, so just bear with me a second while I share this. Now today I wanted to talk to you about a really important topic that I think I've probably overlooked in terms of the things we've talked about up until this point in time. Let's pop that in there and that's good to go. I can pop that out of the way. Excellent. Oh, I might need it in case there's some questions. You should see the setup I've got here. I've got things balanced on all sorts of things. You might think I'm in some kind of, really organised office space, but this is my home office space at the moment while we have kids on school holidays. Right. Today I wanted to talk to you about confidentiality. So one of the very first things that we talk about when we have a new client coming in to see a psychologist, one of the very first questions we will ask them is, have you seen a psychologist before? And people will say yes or no, and then we'll say, do you understand about our confidentiality obligations? And they'll be yes or no, and we go anyway and explain again what the confidentiality requirements and obligations are on psychologists. So bottom line is, when you go to see a psychologist, everything you talk about within that psychology session is confidential. The fact that you're attending is confidential. The fact that you have an appointment tomorrow at 2 o'clock is confidential. So if somebody rings up and says, oh, is my wife coming to see you? We're actually not allowed to answer the question, let alone tell them what's been said in sessions. So there are a lot of protections around the information that you give to a psychologist or another mental health worker when you're working with them, because of course you're disclosing all sorts of really personal and sensitive information, and we have to respect that. We do anyway, but we are obliged to respect that confidentiality. So it's not just what's said, but also our notes are confidential. So, and they need to be stored. Our notes need to be stored in appropriate ways that are aimed at also further protecting your confidentiality. So some practices have, written files, so pen and paper files, and then they need to be stored in a locked filing cabinet so that they're nice and secure. We have a paperless office, as best as we can be paperless, and so all of our files are electronic, so they're stored within a secure practice management system, which is password protected, and that is encrypted. The hosts of that practice management program or software, if you like, have all of that encrypted, so we can access your notes, but nobody else outside of us can do that. There are some limits though to confidentiality, and I'm wondering if you can imagine what might be a situation where we might be compelled to break confidentiality. So the first is we have a duty to warn. So if we understand that, so for example, imagine that I was working in a forensic setting, and forensic psychology is all to do with the balance between psychology and law. So imagine I'm working in my role as a forensic psychologist, and I'm doing an assessment of somebody, and that person discloses to me that they've got a plan to harm or kill a particular person. I would be obliged to do something to either warn that individual. So if I know who that person is and I know what the plan is, I've got an obligation to warn that person or to contact police. So I've got an obligation to breach confidentiality. We also have an obligation, what's called a duty to protect. So if we are aware that somebody is being harmed in a particular situation, we have an obligation to report that harm. So you can think of children in particular circumstances where we might be obliged to breach our client's confidentiality because we have an obligation to protect those children from being further harmed. Now that might come about that an individual has disclosed to us what they've been doing, or it might come about that a child has disclosed to us that something is going on that is causing them harm. Part of our duty to protect, of course, is if a client reveals to us that they have a plan and an intent to kill themselves, so to commit suicide. So in those circumstances, we would do quite a detailed suicide risk assessment with the client. We would look at what safety planning they have in place. We would look at weighing up the risks versus the safety plan, and then we would make a decision with the client about what's in their best interest to keep them safe. So that would usually then involve a conversation around including somebody else in our discussions. So the treating mental health professional might say to the client, right, what I want to do is I want to actually call your GP, or I want to call your partner, or I want to call somebody that you nominate that we're going to recruit into our plan to help keep you safe. If the client is not interested in any kind of safety planning and is intent on following through, and then they leave our rooms, then we would actually have a duty to protect, and that extends to contacting an emergency service or contacting the mental health crisis team, who will then follow up with the individual directly. And sometimes, this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we might even call an ambulance to our rooms to take the person to hospital to keep them safe. So you can see that the bulk of situations where we might be compelled to breach confidentiality are all around safety. So safety of the client or safety of another person. It is very rare that we would breach confidentiality in any other circumstance unless we were subpoenaed by a court. So we don't have the power to refuse to give information to a court if we're subpoenaed. Now, a subpoena is not the same as a lawyer saying, can I have all your notes, please? A subpoena is a court directed document, a legal document that compels whoever is the recipient of that subpoena to provide whatever it is that the court is asking for. There are some circumstances where when a lawyer requests copies of files, there are some circumstances where if the client consents that we might provide that file, generally speaking, it's not the preferred option to hand over a file. The preferred option is to address a list of questions in the form of a short report or a letter or something like that, simply because the information that's contained in a file might be about, say, for example, a workers' compensation case, but it might also be about the fact that the client's having an affair, or the client might be disclosing something in session that occurred to them when they were children. So not everything that's in a client's file would be necessarily relevant to the questions that a lawyer might want answered. So as the gatekeepers, if you like, of your information, psychologists and other mental health professionals really are obliged to take it very, very seriously and think very, very carefully about how we handle that information. But the bottom line, at the end of the day, all things being equal, you chatting to your mental health professional about your depression or your anxiety or your difficulties in your relationship, generally speaking, that information is confidential, and we protect that very seriously. And it's actually there are consequences for psychologists and others registered with AHPRA, for example, which is our registration authority. There are consequences if we breach confidentiality. So it's really important for you all to understand that we do take it seriously, but we're also obliged through legislation to take your confidentiality really seriously as well. So there you go, confidentiality in a nutshell. If you've got any questions about confidentiality, if you're seeing a psychologist or other mental health professional and you're not sure whether you've had that conversation with them about confidentiality, and you're not sure, what happens to your information, just ask them. It's okay to ask the question. How do you handle my information? What do you do with the information I tell you? Where is my file stored? Now, clients do have access under the Privacy Act. We're obliged to maintain that confidentiality, but also there is freedom of information. Those two things sit together. Clients do have the right to access that file, and when we met with a request by a client to access their file, that doesn't mean we just photocopy it and give it to you. It's really important to remember that the notes contained within a client file are often in psychologist speak, so they might need a little bit of translation sometimes, because they're written for us to be able to keep on track of what we're doing in therapy and what our planning is for future sessions. So there might be quite a bit of jargon, there might be quite brief sentences. It's not necessarily a lovely flowing story about you and your life. So we don't just hand over files when clients ask for them. We certainly are obliged to give you access to your file if you request it. But what we would do is typically we would sit down with you and go through the contents together in a session. So we would need to make an appointment time to make sure we've got enough time to do that appropriately. I think I've covered most of the bases. If you've got any questions about confidentiality, I'm really happy to see what they are. Amanda's saying thanks. Great info. I'm really pleased, Amanda, that that's helpful. And I can see Cleo's here as well. Hi, Cleo. Cleo's a member of my team. So yes, if you've got any questions about confidentiality, and if you're watching this again later, don't worry about the fact that it's no longer live, because I'm about to wrap up now. But if you pop any comments or any questions into the comments section for this video, I'm more than happy to come back and answer them later. I always check the comments and follow up if there are any questions. That's it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day. It's been a beautiful day here in Hobart, really sunny. The kids and I have been at the pool for the bulk of the day, and apparently, whisper is, we're going to have a 30-something degree day next week. So summer is well and truly on the way. Have a fabulous day. Take care for now. Bye-bye.